Secondaries. Who doesn't like secondary guns? Well, destroyer players probably don't like secondary guns, and light cruiser players probably don't like secondary guns, but I most certainly do, and I'm sure a fair amount of you guys watching do as well. That is why today we are going over my top 5 secondary ships. Now, there are a few rules for this list video. Actually, there's just one rule. The ships we're talking about, of course, have to be available to purchase outright at the time of recording, so we are not going to be discussing any dockyard ships, any ships that were briefly available and then were subsequently pulled and currently aren't available in the premium shop. Basically, if you can't go on the premium shop website or in the armory or in the tech line and either purchase these ships or grind these ships out, right now at the point of recording this September 15th day of the year of our Lord 2024, the ship will not be on this list. So that's the one rule of this list video. But anyway, let's go ahead and get in on it. Before we do, though, make sure you drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel if you find this video helpful, informational, or entertaining. Of course, that appeases our YouTube algorithm overlord. But now, into the list. Coming in at number 5, we have the Tier 10 Special American Battleship, the Ohio. So the Ohio is probably one of the best battleships in the game, hands down, for just being a good all-around battleship. It's great in randoms, it's great in competitive, it's great in ranked. So anything that you really need the Ohio to do, it can do it. That also comes down to its builds as well. You can run multiple builds on this battleship, and it'll do pretty darn well with whatever you put on it. You can go for a main battery build, you can go for a tank build, you can go for a secondary build, you can go for a mix of all three if you want, and the Ohio will do well with pretty much whatever you put it in if you put a good enough captain on her. You know, meaning the player, right? But when it comes to the secondaries, the Ohio is pretty dang solid. Now, the reason the Ohio's on here, not like, of course, the Massachusetts and the Georgia, because, well, those two are, of course, aren't available. But the Ohio, of course, has pretty much the same secondaries as those guys do. So the flavor of the American secondaries is, well, more of, well, we're just going to melt you down with fires rather than pure penetrating power, which is also why it's at number 5, because the secondaries, they're accurate, they have a very nice rate of fire, and they have a pretty decent fire chance because of the high rate of fire. You see, the Ohio has a ton of 127mm American guns. You got a nice stack of 5 on each side, so 10 per side, 20 in total, and they are quite accurate as far as secondaries go in today's World of Warships. If you want to see something really goofy, go look at like Massachusetts and Georgia gameplay, and even I believe Ohio did come out before the Commander rework. If you want to see like some laser pointer secondary guns, go check out some footage of those ships from before the Commander rework. They used to be so dang accurate, they would just absolutely melt down any destroyer or light cruiser that comes across your path. But nowadays they're less accurate, but still more accurate than most other secondary guns. That's of course where you get the fires from, because of the high rate of fire and the high degree of accuracy. While yes, they are American 127mm guns, and they can't really pen 32mm of armor or really any useful thresholds unless you toss IFHE on there, they're still going to get their damage in through fires. And if you do run across, you know, the right light cruiser or a destroyer, and you have your secondary accuracy built up, they will most definitely melt those ships down without much problem at all. But they aren't really the main focus of the Ohio. They're just kind of like, you know, the frosting on top of the Ohio cake. So while, yes, they are a nice set of secondary guns, they're great to have, you know, that additional damage income coming in with your Ohio. They, again, aren't really the main feature of it, but a solid set of secondary guns nonetheless. The Ohio herself is, of course, again, just an absolutely amazing ship. And again, you know, those secondaries are just kind of like the bow on top of the Ohio present. But that brings us down to our number 4 slot, which is occupied by the Tier 10 Italian ship, the Napoli. So the Napoli, she's the tier 10 Italian cruiser, and there's a good chance most of you watching this video already have her. She is a coal ship, so she is free, as long as you can just play the game long enough to acquire enough coal to get a tier 10 coal ship, which will take you a few months if you just do the coal containers, and if you look in the battle pass or whatever events going on, you can normally scrape by with some more coal if you do that. So again, not a very long time to acquire the ship in the grand scheme of things. But yes, what's sweet about the Napoli is that she was, I believe, the first ship in the PC version of World Warships to have SAP secondaries. So if you look at Napoli, you'll see that she's not exactly coded in secondary guns, unlike some of the other ships on this list, but her secondary guns quite long range, and they have SAP shells. So SAP is HE that has a much higher penetrating capability, but they can't set fires. However, you do get a higher alpha rating on top of that. So they can pin more armor, they do more damage per hit, but no fires. That's basically how SAP shells work. And with the SAP shells on the Napoli secondaries, I mean, for a cruiser, these secondaries can really put in the work. Now, she has a decent bit of the 90mm secondary guns, which normally, if you have those guns with HE shells like the Italian battleships, they can pin, I think, like 17mm of armor, which at tier 10, that's like barely scratching destroyer armor at that point. But the SAP shells, it's much higher, to where they can pin most cruiser armor at their tier. And then she has the 152mm guns. Can't remember exactly what caliber they are, but they're 150s and 152s and 155, somewhere in there. And those guys with the SAP caliber shells, they're really hitting well above their weight class, and with those guys, you're definitely pinning 32 and above. I think they pin like 40-something millimeters of armor, so you're pinning battleship extremities absolutely no problem with those larger secondary guns. And to top it all off, she has an 11-kilometer range with the exhaust smoke consumable, meaning that you can be running full tilt in your Napoli, hit it in a smoke screen, launch your spotter plane to spot for you, and your secondary guns can just start chewing on whatever it is that's around you. And your secondary guns won't push your detection range outside of your smoke screen range, because that's reserved for your main battery guns, but they won't push it out too far, unlike the main battery guns. So you can stay in your smoke and just happily farm with your secondary guns to your heart's content, and it's truly a beautiful thing to behold. And again, the secondary firepower is on a cruiser, not just any cruiser, the Napoli, which is really well armored, really fast, and really maneuverable. I mean, like, this thing's kind of ridiculous. I'm really surprised she hasn't been nerfed yet. But, like, if you have a proper Napoli captain on her, and that guy knows how to angle, he knows the ins and outs of the ship, you can really get a lot of mileage out of your Napoli, which is why she's, a very popular pick when it comes to clan battles and stuff when it is at tier 10. And she gets torpedoes on top of all that too, by the way. These nice 13.5 kilometer torps that are just great for tossing at the enemy team, or of course, in a brawling situation where you can just throw a bunch of torpedoes into your target's side on top of chewing through them with your main battery guns and your secondary guns. So yes, most definitely Napoli is a ship I would highly encourage all of you guys to pick up if, again, you don't have one already. Alright, that takes us down to our number 3 slot, which is technically occupied by 2 ships, and that would be the Grosser Kurfürst and the Pruessen. In most ways, these ships are exactly the same. They have the same hull, the same armor, the same HP, but the main battery guns are different, and the secondary guns are slightly different, but they are incredibly close. So, you see, the GK and the Pruessen, they are the top of the old school German battleship tech tree. GK used to be the tier 10 in the tech line, but that's occupied by Pruessen now. GK is now a coal ship, and Pruessen is now the tier 10 tech line ship. But again, their secondary battery guns are almost identical in that they have a bunch of the German 128mm secondary guns, which can get out to, with a proper build, 12.5 kilometers, which is a nice long reach at tier 10. And with those German 128mm guns getting out to 12.5 kilometers, those guns can pin 32 millimeters of armor, which means that you can pin battleship extremities, again, the bow, the stern, definitely pinning the superstructure. You're pinning, again, cruisers, heavy cruisers, light cruisers, destroyers. You're pinning all of them with your German 128s. And since they pin 32 millimeters of armor base, you don't have to worry about taking IFHE and cutting your fire chance in half. So you're getting good penetration damage out of your secondary guns. You're getting a decent fire chance out of these secondary guns as well. And, I mean, again, they are just really, really nice to have. So you're getting good consistent damage, good fire chance, and a long range on these guns. They're bolted to a pretty tanky hull as well. Now, of course, the GK and Pruessen hull is quite tanky at closer ranges, but as I'm sure most of you are well aware, they are quite vulnerable to larger caliber AP at longer ranges just because of, well, first off, the size of this ship, the very high concealment range of these ships, and the armor layout is just naturally prone to long range, high caliber fire. So yeah, you definitely want to try to remain undetected as much as you can, and try to use island cover to push up into the enemy team before getting your secondary guns in on the action. The only difference between the GK and the Pruessen is that for some reason the secondary mounts on the Pruessen are a more modern mount, either like a 1950s era mount, while the GK has a World War II era mount. But I mean, like, they're essentially the same. Besides that, the range is the same, the reload time's the same, and all that jazz. And plus, with the GK and the Pruessen, you can put Lucians on both of these guys. And once you get 100 secondary shell hits with your secondary guns, you get a nice 15% buff to the reload time of your secondary guns. 100 secondary shell hits with either of these two ships is absolutely not even a high bar to cross at all. You're going to get that in most matches that you can actually use your secondary gun. So you get a nice bump to your DPM there as well. So going on down to number 2, we have the tier 10 tech line German battle cruiser, the Schlieffen. So, well, you know, Wargaming had to go and one-up the Germans by, well, giving us an even better German secondary ship in the Schlieffen. The Schlieffen is just absolutely ridiculous. Like, man, it's just the amount of secondary guns Wargaming decided to put on the Schlieffen is absolutely just goofy. I mean, if you look at the background footage right now, the wall of shells you see my Schlieffen just spewing out toward the enemy team, it's just absolutely insane. Like, we're talking about, you know, Spanish galleon amount of secondary guns that the ship does have. She's got 32. Oh, sorry, she has 16 150mm guns. Then she has another 16 105mm guns and a dual gun mount. And then she has another 8 105mm guns and another set of dual gun mounts. So it's just absolutely ridiculous, fellas. Like, it's just cartoonishly high, the amount of guns that this battleship has. Like, if you asked me as a child to draw a battleship, I probably would have drawn something similar to the Schlieffen with just a bunch of, you know, guns sticking out of the hull. So obviously, because of that, the high number of guns, them being the German secondary guns as well with the improved HE pins, the ship does quite well when it comes to the HE, when it comes to the secondary DPM. Now, again, a good amount of those guns are the 105mm guns, which can only pin 27 millimeters of armor base. But you can take IFHE and get those 105s pinning 32 millimeters of armor, which will give you good, consistent damage from those secondary guns. Now, of course, that does cut the fire chance in half, but, like, again, with the sheer amount of shells you're going to be firing at the enemy team with these secondary guns, it really doesn't matter too much. I mean, I have IFHE on my Schlieffen Commander, and it really don't matter. You make up for it with, again, just the sheer volume of fire that you're getting anyway out of these secondary guns. What's really fun about the Schlieffen is that she has a good range of her secondary guns at 12.5 kilometers, and you can get your detection range down to, I think it's like 12.6 or 12.7 kilometers, so it's essentially your secondary battery gun range. So in matches where either the CV isn't there or isn't harassing your side of the map, you're basically undetected until whatever the hell that it is spotting you is in your secondary gun range. So if they're spotting you, they're in the danger zone. And if they get spotted, you are going to absolutely rip them a new one with your secondary guns. And I've been on the receiving end of a Schlieffen and a destroyer, and it's like a horror movie, fellas. It really is. It's just a never-ending volley of fire that you're just screaming, trying to run away from, and trying to break contact. And not to mention that the Schlieffen still has 16-inch guns. She still has 4 sets of torpedo tubes on the ship, 2 per side, which have a 13.5 kilometer range and do a healthy amount of damage per torpedo. She still has hydroacoustic search, and she's fast. She is really fast. 35 knots is what you can get the ship up to, or I think just over it with the speed flag. So you can literally run down pretty much anything that you need to run down in the Schlieffen and just absolutely melt it. Now, of course, this is offset by the fact that she is a battle cruiser. She doesn't have the thick armor that like the GK or the Pruessen has. She's pretty survivable for being a battle cruiser. She's got a pretty big honking nose there with a nice icebreaker bow on it that you can't overmatch, but the upper bow is very thin, and so is most of the other armor that you'll find on the Schlieffen, so you're paying for that there along with a lower HP pool. But again, it's just pure DPM when it comes to your secondary guns there, fellas. So if you haven't already, get the Schlieffen. You can put Lucians on the Schlieffen too. And the Schlieffen, I mean, like, I average like 600, 500 secondary shell hits with the Schlieffen, which is probably on the low side given, how passive the meta is at higher tier. So, like, no problems getting Lucians popped on the Schlieffen as well. So now we find ourselves at our number 1 slot, which is the Tier 8 Premium German battleship, the Odin. Now, you see, the Odin is actually a joke here, and number 1 is actually occupied by, of course, the Libertad. I mean, this thing's stupid. I don't know how it got out of testing in this phase. She actually got buffed, like, right before they released her in her early access phase. So, while, yeah, she's in early access right now, she will be available to grind for free in 2 patches. And this entry does come with the caveat of she's probably going to get nerfed. I don't think they're going to nerf her by a whole lot. They're probably going to nerf either the capabilities of her funny button, or they may nerf the secondary battery gun range. That's what I would guess they're probably going to do. But anyway, what is the Libertad if you've been living under a rock? The Libertad is, well, it's an Atlantico that literally has a Goliath strap to either side of the ship. It's a super dreadnought. It's still in that, that dreadnoughty design era phase of battleships based off of the South American dreadnought arms race back in the day. It's what if this kept going, right? And apparently there were designs for a battleship that had a bunch of 234 millimeter secondary guns bolted to the side of the ship, which you can get out to 12.5 kilometers if you build into it. And she has combat instructions where once you receive a certain amount of potential damage or a certain amount of main battery gun hits on target, you can press the F key and get your secondaries out to 15.5 or 15.2 kilometers, which is just downright goofy. And you get a buff to the damage of your secondary guns by, 30%. And you get a buff to the range and the reload time as well. So it's just so dumb what this gives you. Like the main secondary battery is a bunch of 234 millimeter guns, which have 59 millimeters of pen. Ain't nothing can tank that, fellas. Now, of course, you're absolutely ridiculous for 30 seconds when you pop the F key, and the F key is super easy to get built up because all you have to do is get shot at. And right now, given how insane this thing is and that it's in early access right now, it gets shot at a whole lot, so it's not really hard to get this F key filled up at any, it's just so stupid, fellas. I can't find the words to describe how stupid and how goofy this ship is. And of course, too, there's a Pan American Unique Commander that you can get right now that makes it even stupider. You can get Joachim right now. You can get him by completing the collection in the Armory. And once you plop him on your Libertad, after you use your F key twice, you get a buff to your main to the speed of your ship, and you get a permanent 20% completion chunk of your F key bar, so that now you only have to fill up 80% of your combat instructions instead of having to fill it up from 0%. So that's kind of insane. And then once you get 175 hits with your main battery and secondary battery guns, you get another 22.5% reduction to the reload time of your secondary battery guns, which means that when you have the F key active, you're running a base reload boost of 42.5% to your secondary guns. And then, of course, you have to factor in your, modules that you're going to put on there, and then adrenaline rush. So this thing is absolutely insane with the secondary DPM that it can just spew out right now. Now, this does come at a cost. It has literally no utility to it. It doesn't have Hydra, it doesn't have a spotter plane, doesn't have DFAA, nothing. You get an improved heal and a damage con. That's it. That's all the consumables you get. And she has 85,000 HP. Her armor is pretty tanky and really quite good for close-in engagement. She has some internal armor bits that basically means she can't get Citadel through the nose or through the stern. But, like most other brawling battleships, large caliber AP just has fun with her, right? And she has a really flat stern, so if you can catch her stern, you can just pin right into that flat stern pretty well. She is quite maneuverable, though. She has a 13-second rudder shift time base, and she has Vermont's acceleration profile, which means she's up to top speed in about 28-ish seconds, or 30-ish seconds. It's something ridiculous like that. It's far faster than most other battleships. So yeah, this thing's dumb. It's probably going to get nerfed, but unless they absolutely bring the nerf hammer down on it, it's without a doubt, as far as secondaries are concerned, the best secondary battleship in the game at the moment. So guys, those are my top 5 secondary ships. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Hope you guys have a wonderful Monday and wonderful rest of your week. Hope to catch you guys in the next one.